Racist cop targets black woman, but her political status ends the encounter. In this eye-opening video, we delve into an incident that highlights the pervasive issue of racial profiling within law enforcement. A black woman finds herself the target of an unwarranted police stop that quickly escalates due to the officer's prejudiced assumptions. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
The city was on the cusp of midnight, and her feet ached after a long day at the law firm. Amelia specialized in corporate law, but was known for her personal advocacy against police corruption. Tonight, she had stayed late, working on a case that could expose a significant corruption ring within the police department, one that implicated several high-ranking officers. Despite her fatigue, she felt a small satisfaction at the thought of justice finally being served. Amelia was not an ordinary lawyer. She was tenacious, unafraid of challenging the powerful. Her brother, Joshua Wright, a former Marine with a background in security operations, had instilled in her the importance of resilience and standing up for justice. Their bond was unbreakable, rooted in a shared belief that no one should be above the law. Joshua was her protector and confidant, someone who understood the weight of her work and the risks that came with it. Though he no longer actively served, Joshua remained vigilant about the safety of his family and would drop everything to defend Amelia if she were in danger. As Amelia walked down the dimly lit street, she noticed a police cruiser parked at the corner, its headlights off, blending into the shadows. She paid little attention at first, thinking it was a routine patrol. But then, as she continued walking, she heard the car engine roar to life and the vehicle inch closer behind her, creeping along the curb. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up a warning, an instinct she'd learned to trust. She didn't turn around but quickened her pace slightly, hoping the car would pass by. But the cruiser kept pace, the tires crunching softly against the pavement, trailing her steps in a way that was far from routine. Inside the car was Officer Thomas Kane, a man with a reputation that was whispered about but never confirmed, aggressive, reckless, and feared even among his colleagues. Kane had heard rumors about Amelia Wright, the crusading lawyer, who'd been stirring trouble by targeting officers involved in corruption cases. He knew she was working on a case that could potentially expose his past activities, and to Kane, that made her a threat. The department, while silent publicly, had its ways of protecting its own, and Kane was one of those officers who took that protection as a license to act with impunity. Tonight, as he watched Amelia from his car, a twisted satisfaction curled within him. She was alone, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the danger that was shadowing her. To him, this was a rare opportunity, a chance to teach her a lesson without witnesses, a chance to show her the consequences of meddling where she didn't belong. Kane parked the car abruptly a few feet ahead of her, blocking her path. Amelia stopped, her heart pounding, her lawyer's instincts warning her that something was off. She glanced around, hoping to see someone, anyone, who could be a witness, but the street was deserted, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and her own breathing. Kane stepped out of the cruiser, closing the door with a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. He approached her with a smirk, his hand resting on the baton strapped to his belt, a calculated gesture meant to intimidate. "Out late, MS. Right?" he asked, his voice cold, laced with mockery. "A lawyer like you should know better than to be wandering alone at this hour." Amelia stood her ground, refusing to show any hint of fear. "Officer, is there a reason you're blocking my path?" she asked, her tone steady, though she could feel the adrenaline building within her. She knew Kane by reputation and understood that this was no ordinary stop. She was aware of his history, aware that he had ties to several corruption cases she'd investigated, but she hadn't anticipated encountering him face to face like this. Kane's smirk widened. "Oh, I'm just doing my duty, MS, right?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension, making sure the streets are safe from questionable elements. Amelia felt a wave of anger rise within her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm a lawyer, Officer Kane," she replied, enunciating each word. "You're well aware of who I am. If you're implying anything else, I'd advise you to choose your words carefully." Kane took a step closer, his expression darkening. He was not used to being spoken to with such confidence, especially by someone he considered a threat. "Confidence," he muttered, almost to himself. But confidence doesn't save you in situations like this. Without warning, he grabbed her by the arm, his grip bruising, and pulled her toward him. "What do you think you're doing?" Amelia gasped, struggling against his hold. Her voice was firm, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes now. Kane's face was close to hers, and she could see the cold, malevolent glint in his gaze. "Teaching you a lesson," he whispered, tightening his grip. "You think you can waltz into our world, dig up dirt on us, and walk away unscathed? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Amelia struggled, her mind racing, trying to recall any nearby landmarks, any escape routes. Her phone was in her pocket, but his hold was too tight for her to reach it. She managed to twist slightly, hoping to break free, but he responded by slamming her against the side of his cruiser. The impact left her breathless, her vision blurring momentarily. Kane didn't stop there. He forced her down, twisting her arms behind her back, ignoring her gasps of pain. "You think you're brave," he snarled. "You think you're untouchable because you're a lawyer." His voice was filled with contempt, each word meant to strip away her confidence. He continued to press her down, his knee grinding into her back. Amelia, struggling to breathe, realized that Kane had no intention of letting her go. Her only hope was her brother Joshua. If only she could reach him. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she shifted just enough to press the emergency alert button on her smartwatch, sending an automatic distress signal directly to Joshua's phone. She knew it was a long shot, but it was all she had. Kane noticed her movement and yanked her hand away from her wrist, not fully understanding what she'd done but sensing that she was up to something. "Trying to be clever, huh?" he sneered. "It's too late for that." Before she could respond, he dragged her toward the rear of the car, opened the trunk, and shoved her inside with a brutal force that made her cry out. The cold metal of the trunk pressed against her injured back as she lay there, dazed and struggling to regain her breath. Kane's face appeared above her, his expression twisted with satisfaction. "Enjoy the ride, MS." "Right," he mocked before slamming the trunk shut, leaving her in complete darkness. Inside the cramped, suffocating space, Amelia fought to control her breathing. She felt every bruise, every cut, the pain radiating through her body, but her mind was focused on one thing: survival. She knew Joshua would come for her, she just had to hold on. Amelia lay in the pitch-black confines of the trunk, her body throbbing with pain from where Kane had shoved her. Every bump and jolt of the road sent fresh waves of agony through her bruised and battered form, but her mind clung to one hope: the emergency signal she had managed to send to her brother. She knew Joshua would see it and understand that she was in immediate danger. They had prepared for situations like this, though neither had ever truly expected it would come to this level of brutality. As the car sped forward, she tried to keep her breathing steady, forcing herself to stay conscious despite the throbbing in her head. She knew that if she lost consciousness now, her chances of survival would drop even further. Kane clearly had a plan for her, and she couldn't afford to let herself fall into helplessness. She strained her ears, trying to pick up any clues about where he might be taking her, but all she could hear was the muffled sound of the engine and the occasional squeak of the car's suspension. Meanwhile, miles away, Joshua Wright was jolted awake by the sharp buzz of his phone on the nightstand. Still half asleep, he reached for it, his instincts honed from years in the military kicking in as he quickly checked the source of the alert. His heart skipped a beat when he saw it, the emergency signal from Amelia's smartwatch. It was a feature they had set up long ago, mostly as a precaution, and they had only used it once before during a minor car accident. But this felt different. Joshua knew his sister. She wouldn't activate this alarm unless she was in real danger. His mind raced, processing the implications as adrenaline coursed through him. There was no time to waste. Throwing on a jacket and grabbing his phone, he quickly checked the location data embedded in her alert. It showed her last known coordinates in a less traveled area on the outskirts of the city. He was familiar with that part of town, industrial, remote, and far from any surveillance cameras or crowded streets. With military precision, Joshua mentally reviewed his plan of action. He sent a quick message to a trusted contact, an ex-colleague from his days in the service, alerting him to Amelia's situation and sharing her location data as a backup. As he sped out of his apartment and into his car, his jaw tightened, and his grip on the steering wheel was like iron. Whoever had taken Amelia had made the gravest mistake of their life. He would not rest until she was safe, and whoever was responsible paid for their actions. Back in the trunk, Amelia was fighting waves of nausea and pain. Every turn, every sudden break sent her tumbling into the metal walls. Her wrists were bruised from her attempts to steady herself, and the darkness only amplified her sense of vulnerability. She tried to focus her mind, forcing herself to stay lucid. She reviewed everything she knew about Kane, every piece of information she had gathered. He was known for his cruelty, his unchecked aggression. But he wasn't acting alone. There was no way someone like him could have gone this far without support. There were larger forces at play, and that realization sent a chill through her. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt, throwing her against the side of the trunk with a painful thud. She heard Kane's footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. He popped the trunk open, and she was momentarily blinded by the flood of light that poured in from the street lamp above. Kane's face appeared, his expression twisted with satisfaction. He reached in, grabbed her roughly by the arm, and yanked her out of the trunk, letting her stumble onto the gravelly ground. Amelia managed to stay on her feet, though her legs wobbled from the impact. They were in the parking lot of a decrepit, abandoned warehouse. The building loomed dark and empty behind them, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. There was no one around, no witnesses, just silence and shadows. Kane's eyes glinted as he looked her up and down, relishing her disheveled state. "You look a little worse for wear, MS. Right," he sneered, mockingly brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Not so tough now, are you?" Amelia met his gaze, her voice steady despite the pain. "You think you can get away with this, Kane," she said. "People know where I am. My brother will come for me, and when he does, you'll regret every second of this." Kane laughed, a dark, humorless sound. "Oh, your brother," he taunted. "The ex-Marine hero, right? I've heard all about him. But let's get one thing straight, he's not here, and even if he was, it wouldn't matter. This is between us. You had to go and dig where you didn't belong. Poking around, asking questions, thinking you could bring down a system you don't understand." Amelia straightened up, trying to mask the pain that racked her body. "You think you're safe," she replied, voice full of scorn. "You're nothing but a pawn, Kane. Someone's using you, and you're too stupid to see it. When this is over, you'll be the one they throw under the bus." The words hit their mark. Kane's face twisted with anger, and he raised his hand, slapping her hard across the face. The force of the blow sent her staggering, but she refused to fall, planting her feet firmly on the ground as she glared at him, defiant. Kane's patience was wearing thin. He grabbed her by the collar, dragging her toward the warehouse doors. "Enough of your mouth, right?" he snarled. "You're going to learn the hard way that people like me are untouchable." With a powerful shove, he pushed her through the doors, and they stumbled into the darkened, musty interior of the warehouse. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of rust and decay lingered. Kane forced her toward an old metal chair in the center of the room, roughly shoving her down into it. Her body protested, but she bit back any sound, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Kane took a step back, surveying her as if she were an insect pinned beneath glass. "This is where your little crusade ends," he said, his tone calm and methodical. "You think you're brave, that you're going to expose some grand conspiracy? People like me, we don't get exposed, Amelia. We decide what happens in this city." Amelia held his gaze, her expression resolute. "There's always a weak link," she replied, her voice low and steady. "And I'm looking right at it." Kane's face contorted with fury, and he struck her again, this time with the back of his hand, sending her head snapping to the side. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, but she didn't flinch. Her silence, her refusal to show fear, seemed to unnerve him, making him question whether he truly had control of the situation. As he paced in front of her, Kane's mind raced, trying to find the right words to break her. He leaned close, his voice a venomous whisper. "No one's coming for you. You've pushed too far right. I've covered my tracks, and I'll make sure there's no evidence left of this little encounter. You'll be just another cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you cross the wrong people." Amelia's eyes narrowed, a faint smile playing on her lips despite the pain. "You're scared, Kane," she whispered. "You wouldn't be here if you weren't." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. But he quickly masked it with anger, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her, his control slipping. "I'm not the one who should be scared," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty warehouse. In that moment, Amelia's smartwatch, still hidden under her sleeve, vibrated slightly, indicating an incoming message from Joshua. It was a barely perceptible signal, but it reminded her that help was on the way. She just needed to hold on a little longer, to keep Kane talking, to buy herself every precious second until her brother arrived. Kane, oblivious to the silent communication, continued his rant. He was so wrapped up in his own fury, his own need for dominance, that he didn't notice the faint glimmer of hope in Amelia's eyes. He thought he had her cornered, isolated, and broken. But in reality, the clock was ticking down on him, and every word he spoke only dug his grave deeper. As he ranted, Amelia kept her eyes on him, watching for weaknesses, studying his movements, preparing herself for the moment when her brother would storm in and the tables would turn. Amelia sat in the chair, her wrists aching from the metal handcuffs Kane had slapped on her, binding her to the chair's cold frame. Her head throbbed, her body sore and bruised, but her spirit remained unbroken. Every instinct told her to keep Kane talking, to draw this out for as long as possible. Joshua was coming, she had faith in that. All she needed to do was stay conscious, keep her mind clear, and bide her time until her brother arrived. Kane, oblivious to the ticking clock, paced in front of her, his anger barely held in check. For him, this was more than a lesson, this was personal. Amelia represented a threat to everything he'd built, everything he believed he was entitled to. The fact that she stood up to him, that she looked him in the eye and dared to defy him, only fueled his rage. "Do you think you're some kind of hero, Right, Cain sneered, his tone mocking. Some righteous crusader out to save the world. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers. You're just another meddling lawyer with a death wish. People like you don't change anything. You're just inconveniences. Amelia met his gaze, refusing to flinch. People like you think you're untouchable because you wear a badge, she replied, her voice steady. But that badge won't save you. Not this time. It might give you power, but it won't protect you from justice. Cain laughed, a short, harsh sound. Justice, he spat the word out as if it were poison. There's no justice, right? There's power, and there's weakness. You think you're on the right side because you can spout a few legal terms and wave around a piece of paper. But out here, in the real world, it's people like me who make the rules. He circled her, his eyes cold and calculating, as if he were deciding what to do next. His mind was racing. Amelia's defiance was irritating him, and he needed to break her spirit before he could feel truly in control. He wanted her to feel helpless, to understand that her world, her rules, meant nothing here. With a sudden, violent motion, he reached out and yanked her head back, forcing her to look up at him. You're alone here, right? No one's coming for you. Your little crusade ends tonight. But even as he spoke, Amelia could feel the faint vibrations from her smartwatch. She knew it was Joshua, tracking her location, closing in. Every word Cain said, every second he delayed, was bringing her one step closer to freedom. But she couldn't let him see her hope. She had to keep playing the game, keep him talking. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with steel. You're just a coward with a badge, hiding behind your power because you know, deep down, you're nothing without it. Her words hit their mark. Cain's face twisted in anger, and he struck her across the face, the impact snapping her head to the side. She tasted blood but forced herself to look back at him, her expression defiant. Her silence, her refusal to cower, seemed to drive him mad. You think you're so tough, don't you? He sneered, grabbing her by the collar and yanking her forward. I could end you right now, and no one would ever find out. Do you understand that? I could make you disappear. Amelia's eyes bore into his, her voice calm despite the fear she felt. Do it then. If that's what you want, go ahead. But you and I both know that won't end well for you. Cain hesitated, the slightest flicker of doubt crossing his face. For a moment, it seemed as if her words had reached some part of him, a part that recognized the consequences of his actions. But then his expression hardened, and he released her, taking a step back. No, he said, almost to himself. I have a better idea. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping the screen as he called someone. Amelia's heart pounded as she listened, straining to hear every word. Whoever he was calling, it wasn't for backup, it was someone he trusted, someone who could help him cover this up. Yeah, it's me, he muttered into the phone. I need a cleanup. Abandoned warehouse, north side. He glanced at her, a twisted smile on his lips. And bring the usual supplies. This one needs to disappear without a trace. Amelia's blood ran cold. She realized that Cain had a plan, a backup to ensure she wouldn't walk out of here alive. She had to stall him, had to find a way to keep him from acting until Joshua arrived. That's it, isn't it? She said, forcing a calmness into her voice that she didn't feel. This is how you keep people quiet. You're just a small piece of a much larger machine, one that's been running for years. But you're too stupid to see it. They'll throw you away when it's convenient, just like everyone else. Cain ended the call, his smile fading as he stepped toward her. You talk too much, right? He said, his tone venomous. Always talking, always thinking you're smarter than everyone else. He grabbed her by the chin, forcing her to look at him. "But tonight, all that cleverness is going to get you killed." Before she could respond, he released her roughly, walking over to a nearby metal cabinet. He pulled out a roll of duct tape and a piece of cloth, his intentions clear. Amelia's heart raced as she realized what he planned to do, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to keep him talking, keep him focused on her. The more he spoke, the more time Joshua would have to reach her. "You think binding me will keep me quiet?" she asked, her tone mocking. "You're scared, Kane. You know this won't work." He ignored her, roughly forcing the cloth into her mouth before wrapping the tape around her head, sealing it in place. The silence was deafening, and she struggled against the bonds, her heart pounding. She couldn't cry out, couldn't defend herself. Her hope now rested entirely in Joshua's hands. As he finished securing her, Kane took a step back, admiring his work with a smug expression. "Not so tough now, are you?" he sneered. "You should have stayed in your lane, right? But now, you're going to be a lesson to everyone else who thinks they can take on people like me." Amelia's eyes blazed with fury, but she remained still, biding her time. She had to trust Joshua, trust that he would find her in time. Meanwhile, on the road, Joshua was closing in on the location. His car sped through the dark streets, his heart pounding as he watched the GPS coordinates on his phone. He knew he was close, but there was no way of knowing what condition Amelia would be in when he arrived. His mind raced with memories of their childhood, of the times he'd protected her from bullies and stood by her side during her toughest moments. She was more than his sister, she was his best friend, his family, and he would do anything to protect her. He pulled up to the warehouse, parking his car in the shadows to avoid detection. Stepping out, he took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what lay ahead. He knew he couldn't storm in recklessly, he needed to be smart, methodical. He quickly texted his backup contact, confirming his arrival, and began making his way toward the entrance, his movements silent and precise. The warehouse loomed in front of him, its windows dark, its walls scarred by years of neglect. He approached cautiously, slipping through the shadows, his military training kicking in. As he neared the entrance, he heard voices from within, muffled, indistinct, but enough to tell him he was in the right place. He peered through a cracked window, his heart clenching as he spotted Amelia, bound and gagged in the center of the room, her face bruised and pale. Kane stood a few feet away, pacing, his face twisted with anger and satisfaction. Joshua felt a surge of rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Inside, Amelia caught sight of Joshua's silhouette through the window. Relief flooded her, and she felt a renewed strength fill her body. She knew Joshua would have a plan, that he wouldn't let her suffer at Kane's hands any longer. She locked eyes with him for a split second, enough to let him know that she was aware of his presence, and then quickly looked away, not wanting to alert Kane. Kane, oblivious to the new threat, continued his monologue, pacing around her, talking to himself as much as to her. "People like you think you're better than us. You think you're untouchable, above the law. But out here, there is no law. There's only power, and I have it." Joshua moved stealthily around the side of the building, positioning himself near an open door. He could hear Kane's voice, could feel the intensity of his threats, and he knew he needed to act fast. With silent precision, he slipped into the warehouse, staying in the shadows, his movements deliberate and controlled. He crept closer, his eyes fixed on Kane, assessing every detail, every possible weakness. Kane was too wrapped up in his own speech, too confident in his control over Amelia, to notice the silent approach of her brother. Joshua moved behind a stack of crates, his gaze never leaving Kane. And then, in one swift, controlled motion, Joshua stepped out of the shadows, his presence suddenly undeniable. Cain froze, the smug expression on his face melting away as he realized he was no longer alone. "Who the hell?" Cain started, but his voice trailed off as he recognized the man standing before him. "Let her go," Joshua said, his voice cold and deadly. His eyes blazed with fury, but his stance was calm, controlled. He was a man on a mission, a man with a purpose, and nothing would deter him. Cain laughed nervously, trying to regain his composure. "You must be the brother," he said, forcing a sneer. "This doesn't concern you, so I suggest you turn around and leave." Joshua took a step closer, his gaze never wavering. "I'm not going anywhere without her," he replied, his voice steady. "And if you think you're going to walk out of here after what you've done, you're even more delusional than I thought." Cain's face twisted with anger, and he reached for his weapon, but Joshua was faster. With a swift, brutal movement, he disarmed Cain, knocking the gun from his hand and sending it skidding across the floor. Cain staggered back, his confidence shattered as he realized he was dealing with someone far more skilled than he had anticipated. Joshua closed the distance between them, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You thought you could take her, hurt her, and get away with it?" he demanded, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Cain tried to scramble away, but Joshua was relentless. He grabbed him by the collar, forcing him to look into his eyes. "You're going to pay for every second of pain you put her through," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "But first you're going to tell me everything I want to know." He threw Cain to the ground, standing over him like a vengeful shadow. Joshua stood over Cain, his expression hardened, his body radiating an intimidating calmness honed by years of military discipline. Every fiber of his being demanded that he give in to his anger, that he make Cain suffer for every bruise, every cut, every drop of blood his sister had shed. But Joshua was no impulsive brute. He had been trained to channel his rage, to turn it into precise action, and he knew Amelia needed him to keep a clear head. Cain lay sprawled on the ground, his confidence shattered, a flicker of fear showing in his eyes for the first time. Gone was the smug, self-assured bully who had dragged Amelia to this dark place. For the first time, Cain realized he wasn't in control, and he could feel the tide of power shifting away from him. Joshua knelt down, grabbing Cain by the collar and forcing him to sit up. He could see Amelia watching them, her gaze full of silent strength despite her injuries. Joshua glanced at her, a look of reassurance in his eyes, before turning his full attention back to Cain. "You're going to tell me everything," Joshua said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Who are you working with? Who gave you the order to come after my sister?" Cain struggled, his bravado still flickering, a weak attempt to reassert some semblance of control. You think this is going to save her?" he sneered, though the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. There are people way above me, people who will make sure both of you disappear if you keep pushing." Joshua tightened his grip, forcing Cain to meet his eyes. "That's not the answer I was looking for," he said, his voice colder than steel. "I'm giving you one chance to tell me what I want to know, or I make sure you understand exactly what it feels like to be powerless." Cain's eyes darted around, desperately searching for an escape, but there was none. He was cornered, with Joshua's unyielding gaze locked onto him. His mind raced, trying to calculate his next move, but he could see no way out. For the first time, he was the one being interrogated, the one without power, and the realization filled him with dread. "Fine," he spat, his voice laced with reluctant defeat. "I was told to keep her quiet, to make sure she couldn't dig any deeper into her investigations. There are people in the department, powerful people, who don't like it when lawyers like her start asking questions. They knew she was coming close to something big, something that could bring down a lot of people. Joshua's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he processed the information. He had suspected that Amelia's work was more dangerous than she let on, but this was confirmation. She had uncovered something massive, something that made people like Kane willing to go to extreme lengths to silence her. Names, Joshua demanded, his voice sharp. I want names, Kane. Kane hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand, he muttered, almost to himself. They'll kill me if I talk. Joshua's expression darkened, and he tightened his grip on Kane's collar, his voice dripping with controlled menace. You should be more worried about what I'll do if you don't talk. Kane swallowed hard, his eyes flickering to Amelia, as if hoping she might intervene. But Amelia only watched him with cold detachment, her bruised face a testament to his cruelty. She wasn't going to save him. He was on his own. Fine, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a network. Officers, officials, people high up in the department. They cover each other's tracks, make sure no one gets caught. They call themselves the Shield. They handle problems. Like your sister. Joshua's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced, absorbing every word. He had heard rumors of corruption in the department, whispers of an organized group that operated beyond the law, but he had never realized it ran this deep. Who's in charge? He demanded, his voice steady. Kane hesitated, fear etched into his features. He looked away, refusing to meet Joshua's gaze. I don't know, he muttered. I've never met them. I only get my orders from a contact, Officer Benson. He's the one who told me to handle this, to make sure she couldn't go any further. Joshua's jaw tightened. Benson. He had heard the name before, an officer with a clean record on paper, but a reputation for taking on special assignments if Benson was involved. This went all the way up the chain of command. You're going to take us to Benson, Joshua said, his tone final. And you're going to tell him exactly what you told me. Kane's eyes widened, a look of horror crossing his face. Are you insane? He'll kill me. He'll kill all of us. Joshua released his grip, letting Kane slump back to the ground. That's not my problem. You made this mess, and now you're going to clean it up. Kane sat there, breathing heavily, his mind racing. He knew he had no choice. Joshua's gaze left no room for negotiation. With a reluctant nod, he pushed himself to his feet, his body trembling as he realized the full weight of his situation. Joshua turned to Amelia, his expression softening as he looked at her. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. Amelia nodded, though her face was pale and her movements were slow. I'll be fine, she said, her voice steady. Let's end this. An hour later, Joshua, Amelia, and Kane were en route to a remote meeting point where Officer Benson was expected to rendezvous with Kane. They drove in silence, the atmosphere tense, thick with unspoken fears and unresolved tension. Kane sat in the front passenger seat, his hands bound, while Amelia and Joshua sat in the back. She had insisted on coming along, despite her injuries, her resolve unshaken. Joshua wanted to protect her, to keep her away from the danger, but he knew better than to argue. Amelia was a fighter, and she wasn't about to back down now. As they neared the meeting point, an abandoned lot on the outskirts of the city, Joshua turned to Kane, his voice cold and steady. You're going to do exactly as I say. One wrong move, and I'll make sure this ends for you right here. Kane nodded, fear evident in his eyes. He knew he had no leverage, no chance of escape. The only option was compliance. Joshua pulled the car to a stop, scanning the area for any signs of ambush. The lot was desolate, surrounded by the crumbling remnants of old warehouses and overgrown weeds. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting, far from prying eyes. As they waited, a single set of headlights appeared in the distance, illuminating the darkness as they approached. Joshua's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his senses alert, every instinct on edge. This was it, the moment of truth. The car pulled up beside them, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted by the headlights. It was Officer Benson, his face obscured by shadows, but his posture radiating confidence. He looked over at Kane, a smirk playing on his lips. "Kane," Benson said, his tone casual but with an edge of menace. "I wasn't expecting you to bring company." Kane swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Joshua and Amelia. He knew he was walking a thin line, that one wrong word could seal his fate. He forced himself to stay calm, to play the part Joshua had told him to. "Things got complicated," Kane said, his voice shaky. "The lawyer. She's tougher than we thought. She's got people backing her up." Benson's eyes flicked to Joshua and Amelia, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said slowly, "and I assume these people think they're going to stop us." Joshua stepped forward, his eyes hard and unwavering. "This ends tonight, Benson. We know everything about the Shield, about your operations, about every dirty move you've made to protect yourself." Benson laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed across the empty lot. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this information? You're a nobody, right? A washed-up Marine who doesn't know when to quit. You think you're the first person to try to take us down?" Joshua didn't flinch. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'll be the last." The two men stared each other down, the tension crackling between them like a live wire. Benson's confidence faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He hadn't expected Joshua's resolve, hadn't anticipated the steely determination in his eyes. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Benson said, his voice low, almost a growl. "The Shield isn't just a few bad cops. We're a system, a force that keeps this city running. You take us down and everything crumbles." Amelia stepped forward, her voice strong despite the bruises on her face. "A system built on fear and corruption isn't worth saving," she said. "You hide behind your power, but it won't protect you from the truth. People like you always fall." Benson's face twisted with anger, his composure slipping. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun and pointing it at Amelia. "Enough of this sanctimonious nonsense," he snarled. "I've had enough of your little crusade. You think you're going to change anything? You're just another casualty waiting to happen." Joshua's body tensed, his mind calculating every possible move, every angle. He could feel the weight of the moment, the life or death stakes hanging in the air. He knew he had only seconds to act, to protect his sister and end this once and for all. With lightning reflexes, Joshua lunged forward, grabbing Benson's wrist and twisting it, forcing the gun to drop to the ground. Benson staggered, momentarily off balance, and Joshua took advantage of the opening, delivering a swift, powerful punch that sent Benson sprawling onto the gravel. Benson scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage, but Joshua was relentless. He advanced on him, each step measured, his eyes locked onto his target. Benson raised his fists, preparing to fight, but it was clear he was no match for Joshua's military training and raw determination. In a final, desperate move, Benson swung wildly, but Joshua dodged, countering with a strike that knocked him to the ground. Benson lay there, defeated, his breath ragged, his face bloody. The Shield's commander, the untouchable officer, had been brought to his knees. Joshua stood over him, his voice calm but filled with an unyielding strength. This is for every person you hurt, every life you ruined to protect your power. It's over, Benson. Amelia stepped forward, looking down at the man who had tried to destroy her life. She felt no pity, no sympathy, only a quiet sense of justice, a feeling that the scales had finally tipped in her favor. "People like you never win," she said, her voice steady. "Not in the end." The sirens sounded in the distance, a signal that the nightmare was coming to an end. The shield would fall, and justice would finally be served. The distant sound of sirens broke the heavy silence that had fallen over the abandoned lot. Joshua and Amelia stood over Benson, who lay sprawled and bloodied on the gravel. Despite the gun pointed at him just moments before, Joshua's calm, steely gaze hadn't faltered. He had protected his sister, and now the tables were turning in their favor. But both siblings knew that their victory was fragile, one step closer to justice, but nowhere near safe. Amelia could feel a chill creeping up her spine as she looked down at Benson, his face twisted in pain and rage. This was a man who had built his power on fear, on the assumption that he was untouchable. And yet here he was, at the mercy of the very people he'd sought to destroy. Joshua's instincts told him that something was wrong, that the sirens weren't the end of the danger. If anything, the real trouble might only be beginning. "Don't think this is over," Benson muttered, a thin, defiant smirk crossing his bruised face. "You think you've won just because you managed to knock me down. You have no idea what you're up against." Amelia exchanged a look with Joshua, her expression steely but wary. "We know more than you think," she said, her voice steady. "Your entire operation, every dirty deal, every corrupt officer, we're going to bring it all down. The shield ends here." Benson let out a hoarse laugh, the sound hollow and bitter. "You think I'm the only one? The only person in this city who's willing to do what's necessary to keep things running? There's a dozen more like me, and they won't rest until they've silenced you both." Joshua's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he knelt down beside Benson, gripping his collar. "Then tell us who they are," he demanded. "Give us names." Benson sneered, his gaze filled with a toxic mixture of hate and pride. "Why would I do that? You don't understand, do you? We're everywhere. You think exposing me will change anything? All it'll do is bring more of us after you. And when we find you—" He didn't finish the sentence. Joshua tightened his grip, leaning in close, his voice a deadly whisper. "If you don't give me names, Benson, I'll make sure this is the last conversation you ever have. You're not as untouchable as you think." But Benson only smiled, a twisted, mocking grin that showed his complete lack of fear. "You can threaten me all you want, right? But we both know you won't do it. You're one of the good guys, aren't you? You don't kill in cold blood." Joshua's eyes darkened. "You don't know me as well as you think." Amelia placed a hand on her brother's shoulder, gently pulling him back. "We need him alive, Joshua," she said, her voice calm but firm. "He's no use to us dead. Not yet." Benson laughed again, a grating, ugly sound. "Smart woman," he sneered. "But it won't matter. The people I work with, they don't leave loose ends, and right now you're both at the top of that list." The sirens grew louder, closing in on their location, and Joshua stood up, his mind racing. He knew that whoever was coming might not be allies. Benson had powerful friends, people with the ability to manipulate the system to protect their own. These sirens could easily belong to another branch of the shield, dispatched to clean up Benson's mess and eliminate any witnesses. "Amelia, we have to move," Joshua said, his tone urgent. He glanced at Benson, who was struggling to get to his feet, his face twisted in pain. "He's coming with us. He's the only leverage we have." Amelia nodded, her expression resolute. She could feel her adrenaline fading, replaced by the steady ache of her injuries, but she pushed the pain aside. They were in too deep to turn back now. This was their only chance to bring down the network that had tormented them, that had nearly cost her her life. Joshua hauled Benson to his feet, half dragging him toward their car. The sirens were close now, the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the dark lot as they approached. Joshua's grip tightened on Benson's collar, his instincts screaming at him to move faster. Just as they reached the car, another police vehicle pulled up, blocking their path. 3 officers stepped out, their expressions hard and cold, their hands hovering near their holsters. Joshua immediately recognized the danger. These weren't ordinary cops, they were part of the Shield, Benson's allies, here to clean up the mess. One of the officers, a tall man with a scar cutting across his cheek, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Joshua and Amelia. "Step away from the car," he ordered, his voice steady and authoritative, "and let Benson go. This doesn't have to get messy." Joshua squared his shoulders, positioning himself between Amelia and the officers. "I don't think so," he replied, his voice firm. "Benson's coming with us. He has information that we're going to make very public." The officer with the scar chuckled, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you? Benson's not going anywhere with you. This is the end of the line, right?" Amelia felt a chill run through her as the 3 officers closed in, their hands inching toward their guns. She knew that they were outnumbered and outgunned, but she also knew that Joshua wouldn't back down. They had come too far to give up now. Joshua's gaze didn't waver as he addressed the officers. "If you pull those guns, you'd better be ready to use them," he warned, "because I don't plan on going down easy." The standoff was tense, the air thick with the threat of violence. For a moment, neither side moved, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she calculated their options. She could see the cold determination in the eyes of the officers, the unwavering loyalty they held to the Shield, and their own twisted sense of justice. And then, without warning, the officer with the scar drew his gun, pointing it directly at Joshua. "Enough games," he said, his voice deadly. "Hand over Benson, or I'll put you both down right here." Joshua didn't flinch, his gaze locked on the officer, his mind working rapidly. He could see that the situation was escalating fast, and he knew they had only seconds to act. He glanced at Amelia, a silent message passing between them, a shared understanding born from years of facing challenges together. In a flash, Joshua lunged forward, grabbing Benson and using him as a shield, positioning him between himself and the officers. Benson let out a strangled cry, his body twisting as Joshua held him firmly, using him as leverage. "Stand down," Joshua barked, his voice echoing across the lot. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me first." The officers hesitated, their guns trained on him, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They hadn't anticipated this move, hadn't expected that Joshua would be willing to put Benson in harm's way. It was a calculated risk, a gamble that forced them to reconsider their approach. The officer with the scar lowered his weapon slightly, his expression conflicted. He knew that if he fired, he could hit Benson, and that would complicate things for everyone involved. But his hesitation only lasted a moment. He straightened, his resolve hardening as he spoke. "Fine," he said coldly. "If you're so eager to play hero, then you can die with him." Before Joshua could react, the officer gave a subtle nod to his partners, who immediately took aim. Joshua's grip on Benson tightened, and he felt a surge of adrenaline as he realized that they were about to face an all-out assault. But just as the officers prepared to fire, the blinding beams of headlights flooded the lot as another car roared into view. The screech of tires cut through the tension, drawing everyone's attention. The officers turned, momentarily distracted, and Joshua seized the opportunity. He released Benson and tackled Amelia, pulling her down behind the cover of their car just as gunshots rang out. The officers, startled by the unexpected arrival, scrambled to take cover, their focus momentarily diverted from Joshua and Amelia. Amelia glanced at Joshua, her face pale but determined. "Who's in that car?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Joshua's jaw clenched as he peered over the edge of the car, his mind racing. He didn't recognize the vehicle, but whoever was inside had given them a precious few seconds of reprieve. He watched as the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted by the headlights. To his surprise, it was a woman, her posture confident and unshaken. She was dressed in civilian clothes, but the way she carried herself spoke of authority, of experience in dealing with high-stakes situations. She walked toward the officers, her expression calm, her eyes sharp and assessing. The officer with the scar raised his gun, pointing it at the newcomer. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she held up a badge, her gaze unwavering. "Special Investigator Lauren Hart, Internal Affairs," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Stand down. This operation is over." The officers froze, their faces paling as they processed her words. Internal Affairs was the last thing they had expected, the one force within the department that held authority over them. The woman's badge was a powerful symbol, a reminder that even the shield was not immune to scrutiny. Joshua felt a surge of relief as he realized that they had an ally, someone who might be able to help them bring down Benson and the corrupt officers who had nearly killed them. The officer with the scar hesitated, his grip on his gun tightening as he glanced at his partners. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and he knew that if they resisted, they would be facing more than just Joshua and Amelia. They would be facing the full weight of Internal Affairs. Reluctantly, he lowered his gun, signaling for his partners to do the same. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of grim finality. Investigator Hart walked over to Joshua and Amelia, her expression unreadable. "You two have caused quite a stir," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "But you're not out of the woods yet. There are a lot of people who want to see this buried, and they won't go down without a fight." Joshua nodded, his eyes hard. "We're ready for whatever comes next." Hart looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Good. Because things are about to get a lot more complicated." Investigator Lauren Hart's unexpected arrival felt like a breath of fresh air amidst the stifling tension. As the Internal Affairs agent holstered her badge and motioned for the SHIELD officers to step back, Joshua and Amelia could feel a slight shift, a momentary opening, a chance to finally expose Benson's web of corruption and hold his accomplices accountable. But despite this seeming relief, Joshua's instincts told him the danger was far from over. Benson was already calculating, his eyes darting between Hart, the SHIELD officers, and Joshua and Amelia. They all knew that once Internal Affairs was involved, Benson and his SHIELD allies faced exposure that couldn't be easily covered up. Special Investigator Hart Benson sneered, forcing a cold smile. "How very timely of you. But I hope you understand that you're making a serious mistake interfering in an ongoing operation." Hart's gaze was unyielding, her calm demeanor underscored by an air of authority that made it clear she wasn't easily intimidated. "Ongoing operation," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call kidnapping and assault now, Officer Benson? Because I call it a felony." Benson chuckled darkly, feigning confidence. "You don't understand the full scope of what's happening here, investigator. This isn't a simple case of right and wrong. There are bigger interests at play, and I'd be very careful about sticking your nose in places it doesn't belong. Hart's lips curled into a slight smile, undeterred. I've heard that line 100 times, Benson. It never ends well for the people who say it. As Hart's attention shifted briefly to the other officers, Benson seized his chance. In a swift, practiced movement, he reached inside his jacket and drew a concealed gun, pointing it directly at Hart. Joshua's body tensed, his instincts screaming at him to act, but he knew that one wrong move could spell disaster for them all. Hart, however, remained calm, her gaze meeting Benson's without a hint of fear. "Put the gun down, Benson," she said firmly. "This is over. Don't make it worse." But Benson's face twisted in rage. A man backed into a corner with no escape. "No, you don't get it," he spat. "I've spent years building this, protecting this system. You think you can just waltz in here and tear it all down? Not a chance." Joshua's voice cut through the silence, steady and unyielding. "Your system was built on lies, Benson. You've hurt countless people, ruined lives, and called it protection. This ends tonight." For a moment, Benson seemed to waver, the cold reality of his situation flickering in his eyes. But then his gaze hardened, and he turned the gun toward Amelia, his expression darkening. "If I'm going down, she's coming with me." Time seemed to slow. Joshua's muscles coiled, ready to spring, but he knew he needed to stay calm. Any sudden movement could push Benson to pull the trigger. Hart, her hand hovering near her own weapon, was equally still, her eyes tracking Benson's every move. "Let her go." "Benson," Joshua said, his voice a low, deadly whisper. "You don't want to do this." Benson sneered, his grip on the gun tightening. "You're wrong, right? I don't just want to do this. I need to do this." In that instant, as Benson's finger began to tighten on the trigger, Joshua acted. He lunged forward, closing the distance between them with lightning speed, and grabbed Benson's wrist, twisting it with brutal force. Benson cried out, his grip loosening as the gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground. But Benson wasn't done fighting. With a snarl, he threw a wild punch, catching Joshua in the side. Joshua staggered but quickly regained his balance, blocking Benson's next swing and countering with a powerful strike to his jaw. Benson stumbled back, his confidence shattered as he realized that his power, his control over this situation was slipping through his fingers. Hart moved in, her gun now trained on Benson, her voice calm but commanding. "It's over, Benson. Hands behind your head now." Benson looked at her, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and desperation. He could see that his allies, the SHIELD officers, were frozen in place, unwilling to risk themselves any further. In that moment, he understood that he was alone. But instead of complying, Benson let out a harsh, bitter laugh, his eyes filled with a manic gleam. "You think this changes anything? There are people far more powerful than you could ever imagine who will make sure you never leave here alive." Joshua's gaze darkened, his voice steady. "Then I'll make sure every one of them goes down with you." Benson hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. With a sudden, reckless move, he turned and bolted toward the car, his footsteps pounding against the gravel as he tried to escape. But he didn't get far. Hart fired a warning shot into the ground, the sound echoing across the lot. "Stop, Benson," she commanded. "One more step, and the next shot won't miss." Benson froze, his shoulders slumping as he realized he had nowhere left to run. He turned slowly, his face pale, his expression one of defeat and simmering fury. Joshua and Amelia moved closer, standing side by side as they faced the man who had threatened to destroy them. "Now we're done," Hart said, her gaze unwavering as she motioned to the other officers. Take him in, and don't think about covering for him. Internal Affairs will be watching. The SHIELD officers exchanged wary glances, knowing they had no choice but to comply. One by one they stepped forward, placing Benson in cuffs and leading him toward their vehicle. He struggled briefly, but it was clear that his fight was over. As Benson was led away, Amelia exhaled, the weight of the past few hours settling heavily on her. She turned to Joshua, a look of gratitude and relief in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's finally over." Over. Joshua nodded, his gaze warm as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "We did," he replied. "But this is only the beginning. There's still work to do." Art approached them, her expression unreadable as she looked between the siblings. "You two just took down one of the most corrupt officers in the department," she said. "But you've stirred up a hornet's nest. Benson wasn't lying. There are people who won't take this lightly." Amelia straightened, her face resolute despite her injuries. "Then we'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. "We're not backing down." Hart studied her for a moment, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good, because we could use more people like you on our side." She turned, signaling to her team to secure the scene, leaving Joshua and Amelia alone in the fading glow of the headlights. The weight of what they had accomplished began to sink in, the realization that they had struck a blow against a powerful network of corruption, a network that wouldn't go down without a fight. Joshua's gaze softened as he looked at his sister, pride and admiration evident in his eyes. "You did well, Amelia," he said quietly. "You never gave up." Amelia managed a small smile, exhaustion evident in her features. "I learned from the best," she replied, leaning against him as they walked toward the car. Despite the victory, she knew that the battle was far from over. There would be repercussions, threats they hadn't yet seen. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, a brief respite in the knowledge that they had survived, that justice, however fragile, had prevailed. And as they drove away from the dark, empty lot, leaving the echoes of the night behind them, Amelia knew that she and Joshua would face whatever came next together. The shield had fallen, but the fight for justice had only just begun. Days had passed since that fateful night, yet the echoes of the encounter lingered in Amelia and Joshua's lives like shadows that refused to disappear. The case against Officer Benson and his network, known as the SHIELD, had gained media attention, and the Internal Affairs Division had begun a sweeping investigation into their illegal activities. For the first time, light was finally shining on the dark corners of the police department, exposing corruption that had gone unchecked for years. Amelia sat at her office desk, scrolling through the news headlines that blazed across her computer screen. Articles were filled with reports about Benson's arrest, the criminal network of officers that had been under his influence, and the growing demands for reform. People were speaking out, not just in her city but across the country, inspired by her story to demand accountability. Her office door creaked open, and Joshua entered, a warm but tired smile on his face. "I figured I'd find you here," he said, taking a seat across from her. "How are you holding up?" Amelia leaned back, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "It's surreal," she admitted, "seeing everything we fought for finally come to light. There were times I thought we'd never make it out alive." Joshua nodded, his expression solemn. "We were lucky. But luck only gets you so far." He looked down, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of what they'd lost along the way, the trust in a system that was supposed to protect them, the sense of safety that had been shattered. Amelia placed a hand over his, her voice gentle. "We did what we had to, Joshua. If we hadn't, Benson and his network would still be out there, hurting people." He looked up, meeting her gaze. I know. And I'm proud of us, Amelia. You especially. You were willing to stand up, even when the odds were against you. That takes courage. For a moment they sat in silence, a quiet understanding passing between them. This journey had changed them both, leaving scars that would take time to heal. But they had also grown stronger, more determined, united by a shared purpose that had only intensified. Amelia looked out the window, watching the city bustle with life below. Do you think this will change anything, she asked quietly? Or will they just replace Benson with someone else, someone willing to play the same game? Joshua followed her gaze, his face thoughtful. Change doesn't come overnight, he said, his tone steady. But we've cracked the foundation. We've shown people that the system isn't untouchable, and maybe that's enough to start something real. Just then, Amelia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw it was a message from Investigator Hart. She opened it, reading the brief but impactful words. Preliminary charges against all involved. Benson talking. Keep fighting. Iowa has your back. A wave of relief washed over her. The Internal Affairs Division was going to push forward with the case. Benson, in a desperate bid to save himself, had begun revealing the names of others involved in the corrupt network. One by one, the members of the Shield were being exposed, dismantling the organization from the inside. Good news, Joshua asked, noticing her smile. Amelia nodded. Benson's cooperating. Iowa is going after everyone involved. This might actually be the end for the Shield. Joshua's expression softened, a look of quiet satisfaction crossing his face. Then we did it. We actually did it. They sat in shared silence, letting the victory sink in, allowing themselves to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. The road ahead would still be difficult, and the wounds they had endured would take time to heal. But for now, they could finally breathe, finally feel a sense of peace they hadn't known in months. Amelia looked at Joshua, a new determination in her eyes. I'm not done, you know, she said. There are still people out there who need someone to stand up for them. Someone who won't be silenced. Joshua chuckled, his admiration for her evident. I'd expect nothing less, he replied. And you know I'll be right there, watching your back. Amelia's smile widened. Then let's make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. We're just getting started. Together, they left the office, stepping out into the city that had once felt so oppressive but now seemed to hold a new promise. They were survivors, fighters, bound by a mission that went beyond personal vengeance. They had faced corruption and emerged victorious, and now they were ready to take on whatever came next. As they walked, side by side, the city's lights shining around them, Amelia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there would be more battles to fight, more obstacles to overcome. But she wasn't alone. She had her brother, her unwavering ally, and a community that was beginning to wake up, to see the cracks in the system and demand justice. For Amelia and Joshua, this was only the beginning.